thank you for coming to the games panel today. The overall topic is around bringing your games internationally. And so we have five fine gentlemen here who will tell you some stories. I want to make this as interactive as possible too, so if there are anything that you guys specifically want to hear about, we have a mic that we'll bring around as well too, so we can take questions at any point. This time is for all of you today. And we had a nice, lively email exchange leading up to this, so we definitely have some opinions on the panel, but great group of guys, so if you guys have any other questions or topics to suggest, please do that. But just first want to start off by having these guys just spend 30 seconds just introducing themselves, their company, and then any specific experience around bringing your games to international markets, just to kind of introduce everybody at the start here. Go ahead.
Hi everyone, I'm Saad Choudri from Miniclip. We're probably best known in the app stores for 8-ball pool. So if you haven't played that, check it out. We also publish James Vaughan's Plague. I thought I'll give him a shout because he's right there on the Android platform. And because we started as a Flash Games website 14 years ago and transitioned over to mobile about 4 years ago, we've always been global and bringing content to the world the moment we deployed it, because we started on browser. We never had to have any of those issues from trying to work in the console days and bring onto different, like NTSC to PAL, for instance. And the way we do that is by trying to keep the language as few strings as possible and keep it very graphical. And we've continued to do that in mobile as well. And we can discuss as we talk how we've done that.
Cool, thanks, Sam.
Hello, everybody. My name is Joe Raeburn. I'm a producer at Ape Games. We make Samurai Siege, which is a relatively popular combat strategy game. We're live globally. We're about to go live in Korea specifically. We had a unique challenge in that we were a team of just 10 people. We got together to make a game where we wanted to take on Supercell and the rest of the world. And one of the things that we had about our game is it's actually a Japanese-themed combat strategy game. And we had some naysayers saying, there's no way that a bunch of Westerners can take a Japanese-themed combat strategy game and launch it in Japan. You must be crazy. And so for a while, we let these guys psych ourselves out. Like, we'd done all of the basic stuff, like in terms of basic hygiene for localization, what Hyunsei says in his presentation is perfect. Just take that, get the notes, follow it. But don't psych yourselves out. Don't listen to people who say your game won't work. Human beings are fundamentally wired the same. Like, our brains are identical all the way around the world. There are layers of culture that you need to pierce through, but as long as you get through that and you have a good game, your game will succeed. So this game that people said they will never like, this Western Japanese game in Japan, in fact has over 50% day one retention in Japan, and monetization is twice what it is in the United States, and the game's performing incredibly well. So don't listen to the naysayers, get the basic facts right, launch your game, success.
Okay, it's working.
Not yet.
So my name is Eyal, I'm from Playscape. We publish games since 2008, and I'm managing the marketing and the business development activities. We have about 50 games in the market, 70 million downloads, and when it comes to launching the games, we always do it globally, so localization is a big issue. Our approach is to try to stay as much data-driven as possible, and I'm sure we can talk about it in this panel.
Cool.
That's it.
Thanks.
Let me see if this is working. Okay, my name is Anatoly, and I'm CEO of Game Insight. Game Insight is a global game developer, cross-platform one. We have over 30 games, 250 million players. And the biggest challenge for us is, once we enter the new market, is to ensure that we could smoothly roll out at least 6 to 7 and even more games in operation. Our biggest genres are Sim Tycoon and Hidden Object, so a lot of story-driven, a lot of localization, a lot of tailoring the content for local markets. And our approach is typically to tie in the launch of the games with some local festive activities, so it would be either holidays or some kind of events. Let's say if it's Brazil, it would be either Carnival or football championship, to really say that we are thinking about local players and thinking about the market and committing ourselves to deliver the best community management and a lot of different practices for that market.
Hello, I'm Antonin. I work for Gameloft. On the business side, I manage, among others, business offices in Moscow, in London, Berlin, Copenhagen, so what we call North Europe. And I'm in charge also of the partnership with Google at the EMEA level. So we launch all our games globally. We localize in 16 languages. We have lately started localizing our games in Arabic language, Indonesian, Thai, traditional Chinese. And we have a lot of local teams who make sure that the launch of our localized games succeed in each territory. So in particular, we are very, as Anatoly said, we do a lot of in-game events tailored to local players. We also make sure that we address the local media. We know the local media landscape, including in some cases the specific social networks that are strong in a given country. Like in Korea, for instance, you need to work with Kakao, or in some cases to integrate Kakao inside your games to succeed. Or you need also to address your players through VKontakte in Russia.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. And so one of the baselines that we've started to talk about is around localization. Talked with some of you guys too in terms of there's many different languages that you're localizing into. If you're not a native speaker, though, it can be hard to understand, is this any good, right? I'm curious if you guys have thoughts or just any suggestions in terms of how do you know when your localization is good enough? Do you need a native speaker for all of those languages, or how do you guys make that determination in terms of when your localization for a given language is good enough to put it out there?
I'm going to take that from a small studio perspective. So what we do is we make sure that we have excellent customer support in place when we launch. So customer support is key. It's kind of like, just like Hyunse said, good App Store descriptions, really, really good localizations, and making sure that you have local customer support on the ground. Get local customer support on the ground relatively early so that they can start gearing up and understanding the game. And those same guys, if they're on board and they're part of your company and they're playing your game, trying to understand it, what we did is we used them as our final layer of QA. So what we're actually doing for our new project is we're doing something like an A/B test. So we're taking one small sliver of the game that we know and we understand and we know that will stay the same. We're putting that out to 4 different localization providers, and we're assigning the customer support agent that role of playing through it in those 4 different languages or those 4 different translations and saying, this one's the best, but it needs this little bit of feedback. So because we need that customer support agent anyhow, and because they need to understand the game anyhow, we're essentially getting this final level of localization choice for free.
Joe, how do you guys hire people specifically in each country, or do you outsource that customer support?
So we've got a system where we kind of give each language a level of love that we want to give it. So Japanese and Korean, for example, they are huge, huge markets. So we want to hire one person specifically for each of those. Some of the European languages, like for example, we're not doing so great in Spain, and we have a few people, and Brazilian Portuguese is quite good for us, but we might find someone in Europe, someone from a player base who really wants to come on board that can speak 2 or 3 languages, and we're like, great, we'll have you. So we try to double up on the languages where the revenue isn't so high, but have dedicated customer support for languages where the revenue is very high.
Yeah, I only say that because, you know, there's going to be studios in here who have varying amounts of, you know, ability to actually hire people on the ground in these territories, which are clearly high value. We saw the presentation of where revenue is coming from. But to answer the question, it's reviews, it's user feedback. It's if you can start seeing your rating go down all of a sudden once you've pushed out a language localization build and you've not changed anything else for the game, and it was doing well before, you probably messed up translation somewhere. So that's probably the best indicator.
That's the negative signal.
Yeah, it's a negative signal. Yeah, exactly. But if it's good, then you get you know, good feedback. You get your account managers in each country saying, yeah, that's really good and that's well done. I mean, we to be honest, we leverage our platform contacts who will say, yeah, you're doing well. That makes sense. I mean, the example I used in our kind of email thread was, for instance, pool means nothing in Turkey. Like, it just doesn't mean anything, but that's what our game is called out there. So we were told by a fan that no, it's American billiards. That's what you actually need to call it.
Yeah.
And it's still English. It's just you don't even have to change it into like the Turkish language string. It's just have to name it what people know that game to be.
Yeah.
I think Joe, you mentioned something about the negative connotation of samurai and.
Yeah, there's because of the Sino-Japanese War, samurai isn't always perceived with the most positive connotations. What we heard from our research, and I'm probably going to be corrected by someone who knows it better, was that about 1 out of 4 people would have in Korea would have a vaguely negative reaction to the word samurai. So what we actually did is, in Japan, it's called like Samurai Big War. We came up with a slightly different translation in English, changed that into Korean, bounced it off our translation company and bounced it off our Korean customer support people, and they said, that name is awesome, so we went with that.
Cool. Yeah.
And so I think the biggest operation we had, and when it came to translating the game and localizing them, was when we had a deal with NTT Docomo in Japan, and they basically asked us to take 100 games and to localize them,
Cool.
which we thought, yes, okay, we can do that, but it wasn't that easy. It's so much more than just translating the text, even if all you want to do is to translate the text. So using QA is always advisable. We had a local partner in Japan. So if you can have that, I think that's amazing, because they can play the game, they can give you direct feedback, you have someone to talk to, which is, I think it might be more advisable than just releasing the game to the market and then starting to see your rating go down each point, like so painful. So that's what we did in Japan. And when it comes to working with translation companies, you can always ask them to also add QA, which means they'll play the game and see that everything was translated properly. So just do that. I think that's a good investment.
Cool.
Yeah, at Game Inside, it's a big challenge for us to run a lot of events and localize a lot of content on bi-weekly basis. So we employ a combined approach of having in-house localization teams across Europe. We have some people in Germany, we have in-house French community management, and our HQ is in Lithuania and Riga in Baltic states, where it's easy for us to handle operations in Russia. So we combine all that approach out there, but definitely it's a big challenge for us with a lot of Eastern European teams to localize that in different languages. So first of all, those teams would typically think, let's say, in Russian. So we have a lot of US people in-house who take that content and make it appropriate for global markets, and then this content would be delivered to other markets. So for us, it's a challenge to let those teams know how they should perceive the world, train them in global events across the world, explain to them socially acceptable practices across the world, anything from perception of vulgarity to things like that. And surprisingly, it's sometimes a challenge to explain that. But yeah, that's our approach.
Could you speak a little bit too for some of the bigger companies, just the amount of investment in terms of the number of people that are working on some of these things?
Yeah, so for localization and translation teams and in-house proofreading and things like that, it's in tens of people in-house. For markets like Asia, we typically partner with someone to work with us. As a cross-platform developer, we have a big advantage of, let's say, going into social network in Japan, working with a partner, and then reusing all that localization and great content that is typically super hard to produce without having those people in-house, and applying it to our mobile games in a cross-platform manner, and we see great results with that, but we would like to expand that and build a better team to serve Asian market as well. We're working in that direction.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, so at Gameloft we have resources in-house for localization, and we also have localization QA teams, especially for, let's say, more difficult languages like Japanese, Korean, and also Russian. Russian is quite demanding because you need as much text as English, if not more, and the characters are both weigh a bit more in terms of bytes. So in some cases we need to stretch the translation very much because our games are initially made in English. So we need to have like Russian text to stick to the limits which are in the games. I mean, there are specific parts of the games like buttons and so on, where you need sometimes to go for a translation which is not as good as another one, but it fits the limits.
Yeah, got it. Cool. One other thing too, we talked about localization versus culturalization, right? So making more significant changes to the game beyond just translating. And so it seems like there's a couple different opinions across this group too. So anybody with a particularly strong opinion in terms of either culturalization is appropriate or it doesn't work, and it can certainly differ by type of game as well too. But just on this topic of culturalization, anybody who wants to talk about whether you're for it or against it for your particular games.
I don't want it to seem like it's just binary going down the thing. And then also, if people, it's the last session of the day, and most of us know each other, so just jump in.
Yeah.
For us, culturalization isn't just the art style, isn't just the pricing. Yeah. It's actually the live operations. It's the events. It's when you do the push notifications. Yeah. It's like people are saying in Korea, it's after meal times, or it's when it's on the tube. And I mean, I've often said that actually the best time for gaming in the UK would be during the commuting hours as well, but we don't have good Wi-Fi in the tube. Yep. So that could all change. So for us, culturalization is crucial, but as a company that needs to obviously make profit, it's very difficult for us to invest in these countries because it's you have to ramp up new offices, you have to find trustworthy partners. So we do go and look for the best people to work with in each territory. And then, it's still a lot of resources on your company. You still have to support that. You still have to have a producer looking at that. And it's quite difficult because that producer isn't the expert in that market, which is why you're using those guys. Yeah. So there's a lot of trust. And you then don't know if it's going to do well. Yeah. And there's track records, and most of us will be trying to look at the APAC region because it's probably the most difficult for us all to penetrate, apart from Joe, who seems to have smashed it out of the park with his Samurai Siege. But we have to culturalize it, and you have to, and not look like just localization, because if you want to really extract the value from these regions, players demand it, because there's so much content out there, and if you won't do it, then a domestic player will do it. So yeah, I think you have to look at what works best for you. If you can do it in-house, great, but the easiest method is a local partner, and there's different ways to cut that up and figure out a deal that works for your company.
So I'm going to talk about a funny story, not from us, but it's from when we tried to get a better Japanese localization, because our first one, someone looked at it and said, that's just rubbish, that will never fly. They then told us a story about this game. It was to do with, I think, some farm animals, that they got a really, really bad localization partner. It was translated into Japanese, but it was like broken Japanese. I guess it's what, it made absolutely no sense, but then they just shipped it anyway. And they shipped it, and it was all about these like little farm animals. And the game did really, really well because players laughed at it and said, this Western art style is so funny, and they all talk in such a funny way. They're such funny characters, and they're so cute. So I guess the moral of that you can take away is ultimately what really matters are your stats. Like if you're not looking at your day 1 retention, if you're not looking at your day 7 retention, if you're not looking at your monetization, if you're not looking at your reviews, then you're not looking at the right stuff. And there might be one, like, I'd love to say, yes, fully culturalize your game for every single territory out there with unlimited manpower, with a 6,000-person company. I highly recommend that's what you do. Yeah. If you've got a team of 15 people trying to make a difference, then you really have to pick your battles. And what we saw when we translated into Japanese is there was just one thing that really wasn't cutting the mustard. If you've ever logged into a game like Rage of Bahamut or any similar games, you know that there are lots and lots of live events. When you log in, you see something that looks like a web page, because effectively it is a web page, and it will say something like 17th of August to 19th of August, special event, exclamation point, exclamation point. That's actually a very, very distinct coded language in the way that they talk about events in Japan. And we run a lot of live events in our game, Samurai Siege. We looked at Asian games for inspiration, and we wanted to be able to do that in the West. And they just weren't getting communicated correctly. And again, our Japanese customer support person said, let me just take what you've got and mock it up in Photoshop. And although event screens are normally kind of like an not HTML, but a template-driven environment where you put translated text over the top and it renders it in in-game and Arial or whatever font we're using, we just decided to do single images for Japan that she made in Photoshop, and she copy-pasted it in there. And then the response to those event pages went way up. And then we tried it on Japanese players, and they're like, you know what, there's not really anything that's wrong with what you're doing. And so we went, okay, let's launch it. On the thing around notifications, I think there's been a lot of a kind of underlying theme of design around designing for people's lives, and essentially that's designing for humans. If you think about when is the right time to push someone, yes, if you're going to send out a bulk push to your entire customer base, then doing it at 2 a.m. is a really, really bad move. Like, you're not going to get too many responses. But if you start thinking about how does my notification system work, and how does it take into account what time the player's playing patterns, like if they always log in at 7 a.m., then maybe the notification should come at 6:59 a.m., you know, to match up with what their schedule is. You don't need to have 200 producers or 20 producers or 10 producers looking what the right times are in each country. You have analytics and data and player patterns, and you can just create nice human-centric scheduling things that work for humans, and you find that generally that will work for humans all the world around. And find what the exceptions are and fix the exceptions, and you'll end up culturalizing a few things rather than culturalizing everything.
So I think there are two main approaches when it comes to localization. You can first of all decide which countries you want to localize your game to, select the top 10, and localize before you launch the game. And you can also start launching the game in one language, then see which one catches up, and just translate and localize as you go. I mean, this is the way even Google Play recommends you to do that, gives you suggestions whenever they see that you have user base that grows in a specific country. The second approach is a little bit more data-driven, but it also means that you're going to launch a game that is not fully baked for specific languages. So there are pros and cons for each one of those. The second thing I would like you to think about is the fact that you're going to localize the game for top 10 languages, but you're not going to be able to localize it to all the languages you have in your game, just too costly, and the operational cost is also something to be considering. So you're going to have like a big category of players that are considered to be in the other category that are going to play a version of your game, and you have to think about how that version is going to look like. I don't think that necessarily going for an English version would be the right choice. So what we have been doing is we started to think about how we can globalize a version of the game. It will be played by people that don't necessarily speak English, but we are not likely to localize the game for. And actually it shows us really good results, both in retention and in monetization. So I think you have to be kind of flexible and mix different approaches if you want to be able to scale up. It's not something that, it's no paradigm. And you know, sometimes you localize the game and it doesn't show any results.
Yeah, could you repeat that too? Because like you shared a really good visual earlier too in terms of what that solution was for the other group. Could you talk about that a little more?
So basically it's really simple, and what's nice about it that globalization doesn't take a lot of resources because you don't have to have translation. What you have to do is to think about what are the strings in your game that you can replace with intuitive icons. And by the way, even if the icons are not very intuitive, it's sometimes just good to put them out there. If they're not taking a prominent part of the game, people just click on it later on and see what it does. So we took the main menu of Flint Chicken, which is one of our most successful franchises, and we just replaced a few of the buttons with icons that we thought it made sense. And after doing so, we actually saw that some of the English-speaking segments actually even react better to these modifications. So it's kind of interesting to see how people react to casual games. I think it's specifically, I mean, you can do it with casual games. I don't think that mid-core games and hardcore games would be suitable for this approach. Yeah. But if you have a game that is not very text-intensive, I think you should be able to think about how you do it that way.
We employ some data-driven practices to figure out if certain country is performing is performing worse than others. So just looking at things like tutorial completion rates, retention rates for that country is kind of a signal to figure out if something is wrong with either localization or content approach and things like that. And then we would definitely benchmark against like English and Russian, which would be always perfect for us, and we would figure out if something is wrong here and there. And the coolest thing in Google Developer Console that a lot of times it gives signals and talks about like this region is starting to grow, but you actually don't have localization for that. For some of the games, we would launch with few languages in beta. For some others, we would definitely go all in and say 7, 8 at least languages, or up to even 10. But then it all really comes down whether these countries could monetize with this type of games. If, let's say, female players in certain country have those payment methods and they have debit cards and they couldn't use them. So you have to be really careful about that, and you have to go region by region and figure out if certain localization is appropriate for that region. But it's sometimes a challenging to localize some of our games, like hidden object games, because for hidden object games, it's a huge challenge to create a glossary with visual things out there. So people would definitely identify a single word with a shape, with an image out there. And if a localization team doesn't have a great visual glossary, let's say this is a glass or this is a mirror, and they would just localize the word without actually looking at the object and perceiving the context of this object in the game, we would definitely see game performing really bad, and we would have to throw out the full localization and go from scratch and explain to the localization team how to approach that. So definitely different games and genres have different approach for us. And in a lot of countries, it's a challenge to have like social context and to achieve as good results as in other countries.
Yeah, so I said that the first step for culturalization is also like your portfolio, because indeed some games, I mean, they won't work in some places. So we see that when we launch, for instance, Spider-Man Unlimited, it works greatly in the UK and the US, and it's, I mean, players from other territories won't necessarily, maybe not even know Spider-Man. I don't know, but it's an IP which is.
How is that possible? Everybody knows Spider-Man, right? Isn't it?
So for and in some territories we basically feel that you need to go really to localize the business model also, as Brahim said before. So for instance in Japan, and also the session on Korea was interesting from this point of view. There is a gacha, so you need to we have tweaked some of our games to make them fit the monetization habits of some customers. So let's say that the very first step that we take at Gameloft to be a global player is to have a very wide portfolio of titles, and to try to have to please to any customer, to have something for everyone. That's
cool.
The first step.
Any other questions from the audience? We can keep going, but sure.
What do you think about community translations? Is it too risky, or it's a good way to engage the users?
So the question is just, what do they think about community translations? Is it a good way to engage with users, or too risky?
We get probably in the kind of general emails where people say, hey, I'm from random country X. I would love your game. I want to translate it. I think there'll be a really big market for it. It's one of those things that comes down to trust. He could be a language professor at a university, and we have had that. But we've still not gone through the process, because sometimes the truth is it's just that market for us isn't really got the traction that we need to justify doing it. So somebody in the community could do the language localization and get it out there, but it's time, effort, and resources really that comes down to it. But why not? Could be good. Try it, check it out. Whatever works for you.
We don't need to test everybody. Anybody have a different point of view? Anybody in favor of community translation?
Well, as our games are kind of being updated every few weeks here and there. It's kind of hard to stick to a single outsource person who likes the game enough to localize it perhaps for a month or two. But I think this applies more to like Indian casual single player games that could be localized once, and then developer would definitely see benefit from sales from this region. He could approach blogs in that region and things like that. But so far we haven't done that, yeah.
You can use third-party platforms to do it, like crowding for you to play games. It means that you can...
Could you get a mic? Can we pass the mic? Come on, Jess. All right.
So we use crowding to handle some crowdsourced localizations, and it's actually been very helpful. It's a good way to just hit the languages which you wouldn't really bother doing otherwise. So a lot of the Nordic countries, I mean, English works fine for us, but we've got a lot of we've got about 5,000 people who have been working on translating the game into multiple different languages, and it's a kind of there's no cost to it, except for sort of, I think it costs $20 a month or something to set up the system. And as long as you can, have an automated way to handle the strings, you can have as many languages as your community want to do, and then you can see if it's worth then investing and having a proper translation done down the line. So if you've got the community, I think it's worth doing.
Cool. Any other questions out there?
So we're talking about translation and localization.
You want to pass it over? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. We're talking about localization and translation, and I wanted to ask if you do just the text localization and you keep the voiceover in the original in English, for instance, or do you do both, or like complete package? And if it's actually worth doing just the text and then having the voiceover in English, whether it's having actually a worse impact than just leaving it in English.
So at Game Insight, we have a title called Tank Domination, which came out earlier this year. We launched it at GDC, and it features Michael Ironside from Starship Troopers, a famous US actor out there, and he voice-overed that for US. For Russia, we used a different person who does VO for a lot of movies, and he's kind of famous star. And then we would have a similar approach for a lot of our trailers and a lot of our content. If we have that, you definitely have to think from marketing perspective how you could leverage the power of famous voices, famous actors on region-by-region basis, whether it could make a significant impact, and how you could make that a part of your marketing strategy. And we found out that it's really worth that, because endorsements of celebrities, as you know from a lot of recent launches by other companies, are very powerful, so you definitely have to do that, yeah.
We have a game in the pipeline, not out yet, but hopefully you'll hear about it. And it's very voice intensive. I mean, you have a lot of text and a lot of voice, and it creates some kind of unique experience, but I think that we are then definitely going to have to go for the full localization. Even some modification in the storyline might have to happen. So, like everything, I think it kind of depends on the content and the game, and you have to consider everything case by case.
Okay, thank you. Can I just? Jesus. Okay. It will be probably for Antonin, because we are producing a shooter as well, and so basically the question, okay, is should we just translate? We're a team of 21 people, so we don't have the resources. So does it make sense to just to translate the text and leave the rest in English, the voiceover?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. There are some games from Gameloft where you have very sophisticated English voiceovers with the voices from the actors, or for the ponies, from the ponies in My Little Pony, for instance. And we don't localize. There are subtitles. So, and I think for a shooter, the main pleasure that players will take from the shooter is to actually shoot. I mean, it's in the action scene. So if you make some good sound effects, it's fine. They don't need to be localized.
Could you pass the mic over?
So China done, Korea done. Where are we going next then? Where's the next market to go into? Forget all this localization stuff, just as in like, where should I be taking my game next? Go on, Saad, let's have a comment from you. Chuck it back.
Chuck it. That's the question I was going to ask of the panel anyway. What's next? For us, we see a lot in Indonesia. People have talked about Indonesia. We see a lot in Turkey. Brazil's quite well known as well. The Middle East, I think Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, those countries, traditionally, a lot of you probably will have very high spending users there, but we've never really culturalized in those regions. We've never really created games that cater to that audience and really support those audiences. I mean, one of the things, people talk about seasonal updates, like Valentine's Day not meaning anything in Korea. One of the things that we did is we supported Pakistan Independence Day. And I'm not saying that because my heritage is from there, but we did that because we have a big audience there. And really engaged the community. No, we community support. Had people out there, and not just a flag. We did other things. Did support. Of course, you're going to do that as well, right? But it's an easy win. But that's what you have to do in emerging markets, where you're not really going to see a financial return, but you know that actually there's going to be a burgeoning community, and they stay there, and they push the game for you, and they help you, and you know, you get power users from there. So you know, everybody's probably going to roll out a beta program soon. You know, people in these communities or in other locations provide very valuable feedback, and there's a great talent pool to see. So I think Middle East, Africa, we're seeing quite a bit in Nigeria, and then Vietnam as well is coming up for us as well.
So just one really quick thing. If you want to avoid pain, avoid flags. Flags are a symbol of political division. We put flags in our game. We put a few of them. We didn't put every single country in there. People get really angry when the country is not represented. When we put Hong Kong in there, we had quite a few high-spending, ethnically Chinese living in American gamers coming together to say, look, these are the alliances that we represent, and we're all going to quit the game unless you remove the Hong Kong flag. Like, there's just grief all the time. So unless you want to maintain every single flag for every single nation and have selective hiding of flags, like you should probably hide the Tibet one for Chinese audiences as well, just avoid a world of pain. You think there's such a nice thing that will make everybody happy. They won't. Indonesia as well is becoming quite hardcore. We have quite a few Indonesian alliances in our game, one of the top 3. Once we offered a special deal to quite a few of our players, and the Indonesian alliance didn't get it because they didn't quite have the spend level required. They called their Indonesian chef that lives at London. He dropped by our office, knocked, and he said he wouldn't leave until we offered them a special deal. So they're pretty hardcore, they're really great gamers, and we're going to be localizing our next game into Indonesian too.
Same question? Or something else? Ah.
Just a little bit more time too. So maybe just, we have about 5 more minutes overall. So.
I was about actually to say India about what's next, because with Android One, we will probably see a higher penetration of the Play Store in India. So then, of course, I think it's about 5% of the population who speaks English, and then you have a lot of different languages. So I guess we will follow that closely, and we will see how this market goes, and how you go there, and what billing options you add, and so on. So it's probably the next territory.
Yeah, I think the next big challenge is figure out how to monetize players in those regions where they just couldn't pay with cards and things like that. So definitely more alternative payment methods, rolling out prepaid cards with general availability out there, figuring out things like price scaling. Not every country should have $99.99 option to pay for in your game, because you have to go into smaller increments and steps out there and figure out how to incentivize those players to to use new payment methods, try them either via SMS, direct billing, and things like that. So it's the next big challenge for those countries, for game developers, to really pay attention to, is figure out how to actually get revenues from there. Because nowadays, a lot of those countries could be only monetized decently via ads, because you couldn't just collect money there. So as soon as more payment options, as soon as the culture of payment would roll out, we'll see a lot of things. And actually, we have tried a lot of experiments in those countries. So sometimes we would say even like 10,000 crystals for a price point of 10 cents. And we would just see that people don't even react to that offer because they don't know the ways of payment. They just don't have cards or things like that. It flags. Like we have to figure out how to get there and how to fix those problems, along like both from the platform side and developer side, or from price scaling and explaining those payment methods.
You want to finish this off?
I just want to finish this off. Yeah, binary size. It's important. Data. Android One, supporting those low memory devices. That's going to be crucial for these regions. I think the payment processes will come. There is actually. I was going to say. Yeah. Right. So it's certainly coming. So we are increasingly prioritizing by strategic market. Obviously, credit card has been available, but we've added direct carrier billing in 26 countries, gift cards in 22, PayPal now in 12. Other forms of payment are being looked into as well. In India, it's very much a cash economy. We can't quite directly accept cash through the phone, but we would if we could. But we're looking at a variety of options because, yeah, to the extent that you have really compelling markets that are just held back by that one issue, it's something that's very actively being explored. And are you guys being aggressive on the revenue shares with the carriers?
Can't talk about those things. Yeah.
So we want to know.
Yeah. Cool. But we should probably wrap. But just thank you guys for all the great insights here. A lot of us are sticking around, so just either find us here, find us in the back and with the drinks. But just thank you all for sticking around through the day.